Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Distanced by Design. This is a show where we talk about creativity, innovation, and collaboration in the midst of a global pandemic, where we can't be together in person, but we still hope to use these things to leverage making a better future. My name's Aaron Bradley. I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati, teach classes on design thinking, innovation, and digital storytelling. And today my guests are Lauren Della and Hector Ariza. So Hector and I know each other from the past. Lauren and I were meeting for the first time today. Looking forward to hearing from both of you. I think you both have had some career trajectory and time to really see and experience a lot of things that I think a lot of our viewers will really benefit from hearing about. So looking forward to talking with both of you today. Lauren, can I have you kind of start us off by telling a little bit about yourself, your background, professionally, personally, and anything that you're thinking about or interested in talking about right now?
So I'm Lauren Della, and I am the CEO of SHP. SHP is a 120-year-old architecture firm here in Cincinnati. Originally got our start in Hamilton. I am a graduate of DAAP in urban planning and never really envisioned myself as becoming the CEO of an architecture firm, but a lot of different forks in the road through the years, which took me in this direction. And I've had the privilege of leading the organization for the last 12 years. And it's been through a really, really interesting period of time. I came into the firm, we had a recession. We climbed out of that, we rebuilt, we did all the things that we needed to do to continue the legacy of all the people that had come before us. And then here we are now trying to navigate through what it means to thrive during a global pandemic. So a lot of interesting challenges. I think the one thing that design prepares you for is being able to solve problems, because that really is at the heart of what we do every day. And so this is a lot like trying to find a design solution right now, the environment that we're in. So that's just a little bit about, kind of where my head's at right now. And I'm sure we'll talk more about some of these other things as well.
Yeah, no, I love it. And that's become a common sentiment. This show was birthed out of the sudden surprise need for content changes, programming changes, facilitating discussions like this. And so as we talk to more and more creatives and designers, exactly what you're saying is kind of the resonating theme, that no matter who we're talking to or what their role is, everyone's saying, designers solve problems, and this is a big problem to solve. And we're going to apply the ways that we've learned to use design, and we're going to see where we come out. So
absolutely. Great. Design thinking has become very popular, and it's a popular application in so many different kinds of things, but it's what we have all been trained to do every day and what we've been doing throughout our careers. And we're really perfectly positioned to help organizations, businesses, public entities, navigate through the things that are in front of us.
Well, Hector, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Hector Ariza. I'm originally from Mexico City. So I went to design school there, and I started my career at a design firm doing packaging already for CPG. And it was years later when I actually joined or switched sides to the client side in P&G. So I worked for P&G almost 18 years there, and I just then moved to Kimberly-Clark recently, the past 2 years. So during my career, I did design roles for Latin America region, and it was pretty much on what we call the paper sector, like diapers and feminine care. And since moved to Cincinnati, I was then more focused on global roles, trying to build brands, but from the strategy perspective, both on the commercial side, but also involved in innovation programs. So, yeah, one of the things that, and Lauren just touched on that as well, is one of the things as designers, and design as a discipline. That's what we're trying to do. And this is just, I mean, as the situation had kind of like expanded more broadly, typically you tend to design for a more focused groups. This is probably the one of the few times that you have the situation where the solutions really have a broader expansion in terms of impact. So I mean, it's definitely been interesting times, and again, we're trying to just add our little help there to try to cope with this and help like go back to whatever the new norm is or will be.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think, the whole idea and the premise even of the show, being distanced by design, right? Not being together in proximity can often be a really big limitation to what we perceive as creative flow and productive brainstorming or productive problem solving. So I think it's always good to kind of start with talking about if each of you could just tell us a little bit about like what role did collaboration and creativity and innovation and working together play in your lives and your careers prior to the pandemic.
From our standpoint, we work very collaboratively, both internally and externally. So both internally with our design teams and our consultants and the other people that are involved in projects, and then of course with our clients, we've worked extremely collaboratively. So one of the first challenges was to figure out, how to do that in a way that felt authentic and was still going to provide kind of that meaningful experience, those moments when you have that light bulb go off, or probably the hardest thing to recreate is what you think of as more the serendipity. Somebody walks by, they see something in progress, and they have something to offer that then touches off another idea. That part has been somewhat of a challenge. And so I know, like, some of our teams, as they've been working remotely, they leave Google Meet on all day so that there's kind of that constant flow going on in the background when they're not actually having physical meetings and things like that, to try and keep that going. And I'd say the other thing that has really been important and has happened as a result of this is we're just communicating even more. We're working that much harder at trying to make sure that these things are happening. So it's producing more communication, and it's producing, in a lot of ways, better communication, because we have to really listen to each other in this format.
What about you? You were in Chicago, but some of your creatives that you were leading were distributed, or at least peers were distributed, right? You weren't necessarily always all together in the studio.
Yes, exactly. So I think there's both a component of, again, pre-pandemic, right? Which in a global environment, like from a market, global brand standpoint, there was already a level of like telecommunication or collaboration, either with studios in other regions, sometimes in a very radical time zone. So that thing actually probably was a good foundation to adapt to the new situation. So in itself, there was already some ways that we collaborate, but it was more in a more like simplified way. Like Lauren was saying, it was just more like either like a few smaller sessions and leveraging video conferences as we had. But there was more like the core, the intimate design development that happened in the studios, and that's where you have more like display thinking, the one-on-one collaboration that had to be, I mean, shifted a little bit as well via like using technology, like with the conference, which again, it limits a little bit of the warmth of the in-person piece, but it's something that the teams are pivoting into leverage more and more. So uh, there's definitely the component internally on how to adjust to this piece. What it's also, I mean, it's, at least in the environment that I'm in, how we go about finding or getting those insights when it's about consumer experience. Because that's the piece where, I mean, if I think about the previous reality, from a design process standpoint, design thinking process standpoint, you're trying to keep the empathy level at its best. And it was trying to get consumers in the most realistic, more natural context, so you can get the more realistic insights. That thing, that element has been lost a little bit, or a lot, I would say, because you have to, you still reach out to them, but there's now the component of this, as I was mentioning, the video element of it, which again, it's interesting because in the same way, it's a little bit accepted, even from a consumer standpoint. So the consumers naturally put additional, I would say, efforts, or it's already familiar because that's also how they interact with the rest of the world. But it's really defining how I have to go about to gaining all these new insights. It's like, yeah. So it's this element of like, yeah, it may look out of context for them, but in reality, it's still becoming part of their new life. So
yeah, when I think about things like doing qualitative design research, and like especially if you're letting someone touch, feel something, or even smell
exactly.
it, being able to be there and read the room, a good researcher that really understands the art, not the science of research, is watching nonverbal cues, and they're reading the room and all of these things. And been having a lot of those conversations with folks about how that's a missing element, that no matter how good the technology gets, I don't know how you recreate that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I don't know if either of you are experiencing that, or even just having conversations around that. But
yeah, well, that for me that's kind of like the ultimate like problem to tackle, especially the product interaction, and when you need that more like sensorial feedback or reaction. Because I mean, I talk with my teams that it's either like you can give consumers or the user access to it in advance, but that also limits the level of the surprise factor. Because if you ship them the samples before, I mean, we're all humans, so just natural curiosity will just like stop them like from oh yeah, no, I'm gonna wait till the interview, right? I mean, it's like when even the agencies or design partners send you their presentation in advance in case there are problems with the connection, you're gonna sneak in, right? You're gonna take a sneak peek and look at it. So that's the piece that, I mean, even from a design thinking challenge, that's something that it's for me at least, is still an ongoing way of like, how do we really recreate that, again, in-person product experience that, I mean, the digital world, as developed as it is not providing today. I mean, you can think about virtual reality, but even in that sense, it's it caught us by surprise. I don't think technology, at least in a more like mass level, has given us yet. So, I mean, I'm sure there are virtual reality solutions, but either they might be super expensive or not very accessible. So.
Yeah, Lauren, I know you're not making products per se, right? But this has to carry over into how people interact with spaces, right?
Oh, definitely. And we do use a lot of virtual reality to be able to show people spaces before anything has ever gone under construction, and it's a very effective tool for not just communicating the design, but it's a very effective design tool because you can almost be designing on the fly as people are experiencing and interacting with spaces, and then deciding, well, this doesn't feel right, or this feels great, let's change this, let's leave this the way it is. So we definitely have those tools available to us, and they do make a difference. And we have other tools that can really put you in a space exactly as it is, not as a 3D model, but exactly what's there. So there's more and more technology that's available to us to kind of recreate or create those experiences. I do think that we're just on the verge of seeing meeting technology that's going to be entirely different. You said read the room, and it is difficult in a WebEx or a Zoom meeting or something like that, especially if you've got 30 30 heads up on the screen or even fewer than that. And mostly what you're looking at is people's heads. So you're not seeing any body language. You can't keep track of everybody at the same time. But I think there are tools that are coming which will really, make us our own avatars essentially and put us physically in these meeting rooms, and we'll be replicating things like our body language and whatever. We're going to have to get used to it. We're going to have to get used to how we're represented in those spaces. But I think I don't think that's far off. I think there are already people messing around with it. We're just not seeing it mass used.
It's a really lo-fi example, but so my wife and I started doing Peloton during this. Super smart move on their part.
Mm-hmm.
They made it free for 3 months, knowing everybody would need it, and now you're hooked, right? But my 4.5-year-old actually was the one that discovered this high five feature, so that when you're doing a Peloton workout at the same time as these other people, you can have this board up that shows you who's there, and all you have to do is tap on their avatar, and you've then high-fived them. They get a notice saying like, "Oh, Aaron high-fived you," and then they're encouraged to high-five you back, right? So it's super lo-fi, but it's so interesting to me to see this like faceless almost way of trying to recreate what it would be like to be in the gym together and like encouraging one another. That alone, that inspiration got me thinking like, well, what's it look like to like be in a brainstorm that's virtual? And there's usually that person that's, you can just tell like they can't wait to get that idea out, and you can see it building in them. You're like, okay, yeah, Hector, you go now, right? Like we don't have that in our little boxes. So like, what's the reaction that's like I'm in, or I want to stick a Post-it note up, right?
Right. That's very interesting because it brings a little bit of sensoriality to the social distance, right? So for example, the gym that I go, it's just starting to open up. So there's social distance in their stations and everything. But of course, what used to be a physical high five or so, now it's just an air high five, which it's a reminder that you cannot get closer, right? Now, in the context of you were saying, the sensuality comes like, even though I cannot touch you, because I can physically not touch you because you're like miles away from me. The fact that you can touch a screen or so gives you a little bit of that like small touch of like, okay, I'm physically interacting with you even though I cannot feel you. In that sense. So it's I think all of this is very interesting in that sense of how like people are adapting and even taking those little hints and provide sometimes more energy and value to try to recreate the new norm. And of course, from generation, in case, I don't know how much this is going to last or expand throughout the years, but there's also like kind of like the pre-war feeling, right? There will be generations that I remember life before internet. Like, I cannot imagine my life without internet. So there might be also a little bit of this sense of like, I remember the old days. So it's that's very interesting. I never thought of that, but yeah, there's like this pre or post effect, right? And how it's going to affect us, or it's affecting us.
One of my colleagues writes and speaks extensively on the topic of gaming and education and the role of gaming as a way to deliver coursework and things like that. And his contention is that he watches his 14-year-old have this amazing level of interaction with people that he games with from all over the world. And they are physically in the game together because they have avatars and their avatars are moving through those spaces. And he feels like we are this close to actually replicating that in our lives in a much bigger way, partially because we have an entire generation that gets it, understands it, has been doing it. They understand banking. There's history, there's art, there's science, there's all kinds of things that are happening in the context of these games. And it's really fascinating. I think for me, being up there in years, not a gamer necessarily, I just can't even imagine that not having the human interaction.
Yes.
But for them, this is human interaction. So I think we have to understand the influence of generational change on how all of these things are going to ultimately play out.
Yeah, and Laura, that's a very interesting point, because there's also exactly that is the preconception, right? I mean, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but I mean, when you know how things operate or work, it takes a different mindset or mind shift to say, okay, I'm going to try to learn it a different way, versus you learn it that other way as the first way. Then you more naturally see the possibilities of like expanding and using it different ways, versus, again, when you have a preconception of a previous way to do it, you won't always naturally try to rationalize on the old ways how this new ways is working. It's something that, again, but in the conversation, as from the design perspective, that's something that we it's a key role for design, how we really bridge that gap of like, we really need to enable this openness or introduction to new things for people like us that were more used to a different way of doing things or interacting with things.
Yeah, well, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the really cool things that has come out of all of this is that if you just, pay attention to how clever people have approached all different aspects of what it means to be socially distanced, it's so evident that what we've done is, inadvertently with this pandemic, is unleashed, I think, a whole new age of creativity that is going to really vault us forward in the way that we approach all of the kind of traditional aspects of our lives. And it's going to happen much faster because necessity is the great mother of invention, right? It's going to happen much faster than what we ever could have anticipated.
Yeah, I've been having this conversation with a few people because, so ironically enough, for the last 3 years, I've been teaching a sponsored course on the future of work. And it's a transdisciplinary course where we come in and it's very ambiguous prompt, and we study the topics the students are interested on, and we basically Futurecast. And was teaching that class in the midst of this happening, and the class getting dispersed right after their midpoint sort of review with our client. And so here we are teaching in real time about what do we think the future is for work. And now we're experiencing the future, right, in real time. And one of the big takeaways was that some of these topics that over the last 3 years students have brought up and said they think are going to happen in the next 20 years, all of a sudden we were hoping would be possible within 18 months even, like things about like how could, the technology evolve in such a way that you don't have to be in the same place. How could workflows change so that it doesn't matter anymore that you don't have everybody synced up on the same Outlook calendar? And these were all things that were being projected as these 10, 15, 20-year predictions of how we'll slowly get there. And then now all of a sudden you're having pain points because they don't exist yet, which then forces, just like it's forced scientists to rapidly pursue a vaccine, it's forcing technologists and creative leaders and everybody to rapidly try and like fast track something we thought would be 20 years out, right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that would be interesting in a similar line is even the role that sci-fi and the movie industry has played in innovation in itself. Because by not having the constraint of anything, and especially with technologies today, I mean, you can create pretty much any universe and situation you want. But I'm sure I will not be surprised that, I mean, the next emerging themes from a movie industry standpoint will be tackling this and inspiring and informing even a larger stream of innovation. Because again, there's always the more technology driven innovation, but there's also like this like more out there FAI-ish sort of thing inspired by movies and sci-fi in general. So I think it's going to be interesting future what's coming.
And we're having those exact kinds of conversations right now with our workplace clients, and they're conversations that have changed from 4 or 5 months ago, because everybody is thinking about this differently than they were, and what the impact on space is going to be significant. We kind of see it as there's sort of a short term, midterm, and long term issue, right? And you have to figure out everybody has been so consumed with what does it mean to return, right? What does it mean to return to work? What does it mean to return to school? And dealing with that kind of short-term problem to solve. But really, I think what we're finding much more interesting is what's the midterm and long-term implications of this relative to space. And do we need less space because we have more people working remotely? Do we need more space because we need to be more socially distanced all the time? Do we need to have space at all? A lot of the benching and hoteling solutions that were popular 6 months ago, people are questioning now. There's so many aspects, and then where does the role of air come into all of this? I mean, that's another conversation that we're having a lot of dialogue about. How do we think about surfaces? Do we think about surfaces differently? Do we think about entries differently? All of those kinds of things. And do you suddenly change all that thinking if there's a vaccine? So there's so many complex topics to be tackling right now.
Yeah, and again, it's also because in the end, it's the human behavior aspect of it, right? I mean, Lauren, you said it totally right. I mean, we are planning for the mid and long term, but just like this situation generated an immediate behavior shift in a matter of weeks, so people now are super over conscious of the social distance, things can shift a little bit or shift again. I will not say go back to normal, but a totally different normal when you get a vaccine, because then you take care of COVID-19. But what has been exposed is there might be a COVID-36 or a different thing that will come in and that probably create the same situation. And then the question is, did we learn as a humankind and know that, I mean, kind of be better prepared, or it's what I call the Jaws effect, like the movie, right? I mean, you can have somebody screaming in the shore, like there's a shark, but until the shark doesn't come and bite somebody or eat somebody, people will not freak out. And even as the shark bites or eats and then moves away, people will go back to the beach. So it's this is something that is, for me, is the most intriguing piece, the behavioral aspect of like the new norm, and how the new norm will continue shifting as much as we think we've learned, and it will impact us in many situations.
And I think you're absolutely right. I think a really good example of that is that some of the tech companies have said, we're just going to work remote. We're not going to bring people back. And that's okay. And I think that because they're tech companies, they probably feel like they have to be, kind of on the leading edge of that conversation. But one of the things that they're potentially doing in sending everybody out to work remote is they're giving up one of the things that's attracted talent to those organizations, and that is their culture, right?
Yes.
So, the all or nothing approach is highly unlikely to work for a long period of time. And I would suspect that over time that will change. And especially once there is a vaccine, I think we're going to see that change. And you're absolutely right. COVID could mutate. There could be other forms of it. We could need multiple vaccines like we have with the flu. There's any number of things. There's obviously numerous things that could happen to us from an environmental perspective, whether it's, not another COVID, it's something completely different. We're going to be in a constant state of change. But I think we're better prepared now to deal with that.
Yeah. And also,
well, I was mentioning, Hector, you kind of said before, you said, we have to be ready for what if it's COVID-37 or whatever else. I mean, I also wonder, aside from even what this exposes about being prepared for a disease or pandemic related thing, but what also does it force or kind of root out in terms of human behavior that are not disease related at all, but we're just always there anyway. And this becomes the stimuli that brings it out. So then will we learn from that and say, for instance, oh, wow, we invested so much in the campus culture that made Netflix what it is or made Facebook what it is. And now we realize that that actually wasn't an important, or maybe vice versa. We realize like that was the defining, attracting talent that got us or the defining thing that got us talent. We actually need to go all in on that even more. Like we need to set up more regional shops with cool spaces that become campus experiences. You don't have to come to Palo Alto anymore to be at our tech company and have the culture. You can do it in Michigan or wherever else, and those are all like the great wide open, right?
Yeah, but
Right.
exactly. And in the end, it's still again the human component. Lauren, you said it perfectly, right? I mean, technology and resources can allow you to work from the moon even, but it's culture what it's typically what makes the difference from workplaces and companies. And so that's rooted in human interaction. I mean, you can create a culture via like digital and e-communication and everything, but the human element of that, it's what really either, I mean, accelerates culture, but also fosters it and grows it. So
I just know that, probably in the last, I'm going to say 5 years, every person that we have interviewed for a job has asked that question. What's the culture of your
uh-huh.
organization? And oftentimes that's the first question that they ask. And so I don't see that going away. I think that is still going to be a variable. Now, I think one of the advantages of remote work is it will give us access to talent that we wouldn't have had access to before, just simply because they're not here or they don't want to move here or whatever. And like we have a guy right now that works for us who lives in Dubai, and 5 years ago, I don't know if we would have been able to do that, but necessity created a situation where we had to, and it's works effectively, and it's great. But he was with us inside the organization, part of that culture before he ever ended up in Dubai. So he kind of takes that with him. It's still part of what he values about the organization. So, I think there's going to be pros and cons, and there's and maybe it's just my generation talking, but I find it hard to believe that we will ever be in a situation where human interaction, face to face human interaction, isn't still important.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and again, you can see it even today, right? In the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, people, for whatever reason or driver, they can't wait to go out and socialize. And then sometimes they push the boundaries, or sometimes they bring back some problems that already containment was happening. But you see this natural piece of like, okay, I'm done with this. I need this person to person interaction, which is,
Mm.
to your point, what will continue informing new ways of doing it safely, but it's really imprinting the necessity of there has to be in-person social interaction component. We cannot, I mean, it would be really hard to really go to the other side of the pendulum where like, oh, it's like a completely virtual reality world, right? I mean, kind of like the avatar. So I just go into a cocoon and then I'm interacting and living. So
I think we've we've sort of even danced in and out of this subject, but it's something I wanted to kind of just directly bring up to both of you is, you're both in a place in your career where you're leading large chunks of work or in people and sectors of business, whether it's, a specific like the global category or literally the entire company as the CEO. What are some things that, when you move yourself out of like being the day-to-day tactical creative and now you start thinking about how do I lead a creative organization in the midst of this time, what are some of the things that you've been learning from that or reflecting on about how to effectively do that and make your areas of business and the people that work with and for you successful despite these limitations?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a big question. And for my organization, we have a group of senior leaders that are going to be exiting the firm, over the next few years. And so, right now, very much, we're in a state of transition. What what does it mean to transition to the younger leadership of the organization, and how do we set them and the organization up to have success going forward? from my own standpoint, I feel like if I don't set them up for success, then I haven't done my job. And there's also a lot of pressure when you have an organization that's as old as this one is, to make sure that there is that balance between that long legacy and making sure that there is a future, especially an organization that's been through wars and depressions and famines and all kinds of other stuff, right? Not much that it hasn't seen. So we're really wrestling with all of those topics right now, and setting up the younger generation for the future does mean doing a lot of future casting, which we've been doing for the last several years. It does mean doing a lot of strategic planning about what our market's going to look like, how are we going to be approaching them, what kind of people do we need, what kind of technology, or how much deeper can we go in terms of research and advocacy and those kinds of things. And we're guessing. Some of it's a gut, right? Some of it's just gut. But the big thing is that it can't be just tactics, and there has to be a focus on strategic leadership for the future, meaning what's happening in our world, what's happening in our industry, how are we going to best position ourselves to respond to those things, and how are we going to do it confidently, while at the same time, still having a financial model that works and all that other stuff, and doing the mundane things like providing healthcare and HSA contributions and 401k contributions and everything else. So, there's a lot right now that goes into it, and there's a lot that is about what does the next generation need.
Yeah, for me in the design teams, it's exactly that. It's how do we really, from a leadership standpoint, it just is demanding to be probably more accessible than ever. Because again, you don't have the physical interaction. Or okay, I mean, I see you in the aisle. Let me ask you. I mean, you have to be more accessible, and even within that, how do you also compensate also again this social distancing, especially when it comes to creativity, fostering creativity. So what used to be a round table of like even sitting down to have lunch and talk about a topic, how do you really adapt to the new circumstances but continue to provide that fuel that the industry, I mean, our industries require, which is how do we keep creativity and strategic thinking flowing. So the accessibility, being accessible as a leader, but also providing outlets and and good connection to external stimuli. It's going to be key to it. I mean, to help continue um, uh, the intention of the culture and the teams.
You mentioned something about the accessibility part, and given that both of you are in these leadership roles, one of the things I'm interested in is this situation flattening hierarchies, or whatever the opposite of that would be, making them taller. I've seen and heard sort of anecdotal examples of both, and I know what I'm experiencing personally in my own work and everything. And what are the two of you seeing in terms of that? Or maybe there's no change at all. I don't
My organization's been pretty flat. We there's a hierarchy on paper, but we don't really operate that way. We really operate very much with an open door, well, we don't have a lot of doors policy. So, but what I have found is that I just need to work harder at reaching out to people, because that casual interaction in the kitchen or at the coffee pot, or walking down the hall or in the restroom or whatever, is not happening. So I just, just to stay in touch and make sure that people are doing okay and that they feel productive, and if they have needs, that they're not afraid to say so. So it's been a lot more reaching out, I would say.
Yeah, I think similar here. I mean, in my environment, especially for working teams, it's pretty flat. And even the access to upper management, because it's more specific in its windows, we continue to follow in the same protocols, but it's just more the day-to-day with the working teams that kind of remain the same. And again, it's just to adapting to the new ways, right? It's being accessible has also expanded a bit the boundaries, and there's probably another topic of conversation of like um, how do you keep your personal and work-life balance in that sense? Because I mean, you have to be accessible, but then that means that your break, instead of being going and grab some coffee, at least is now I can go on my backyard and take a 10-minute break in the sun, which is great. But that also extends your spectrum of engagement, because now you're engaged until longer hours. So that also has morphed into this like really weird shape of like I before I didn't have a chance to take these beautiful breaks, or I have 10 minutes, I'm gonna go and change a light bulb or do something at home or so, right? But now in the same sense, now it's 8 p.m. and I'm ready to I just been pinged to connect with somebody that it's needing my help, or in another part of the world. So it's a weird limbo in where we are. I mean, again, it has positives, but also it's like weird negatives, I would say.
Yeah, I just had a conversation like this with a student that I have this summer as a research assistant. She's a first year, coming out of her first year industrial design. And we were supposed to be working on this very collaborative team research project that I was going to do with a group of co-op students. And things changed as a result. Obviously, we've all adapted. And so we're sort of morphing the project in real time. And one of the things that she started talking about and interested in as an industrial designer was is there something spatially or a product line or something that would actually help people to find the appropriate balance of work life integration when you don't ever get to leave your work environment now? And it wasn't fully articulated yet when we started the conversation. And by the end, we were actually starting to like visualize and sketch these things that might help you do that, that would essentially tap into the emotional response that you have of being able to separate work and home by having physical distance between the two, right? And even if you're a work from home veteran prior to this, you probably still had like your home office that was like, well, that's my sacred space for office, but I only go in there for work, right? And now that's all out the door, as well as the times that are designated as work times and all those things. So
yeah, but even interactions have become more relaxed, right? I mean, I remember I mean, right? If for some reason you're deciding, okay, it's a Friday, I'm going to work from home, you still try to keep it in a professional way, meaning like I'm going to either seclude in my office, or one of the things that I personally have found that is the best privacy phone booth is I go to my car in the garage. So in the car, there's no barking dogs, there's no, but I mean, in that sense, I mean, in the previous world, you wanted to preserve that normality of like people should not. It's not. I mean, it's not preferable that people realize that I'm not in the office, right? Even though it's okay and it's aligned and everybody's. Now it's completely okay if I'm even in a conference call and there's a scream of one of my kids, or the dog just breaks in and barking. People go like, yeah, but because this is a new norm, right? So again, all of these things are like shifting and being more flexible, and so but it's creating a completely different professional environment in terms of how we interact in our work level.
yeah, well, I feel like it even starts to bleed in potentially, depending on how reflective you are. I feel like it actually starts to even bleed into a person's identity, right? Because you've crafted a work self, or you have a work self, and you have a part of your identity that's that, and you have a home self and identity. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about a lot too, is kind of like when all of a sudden the bounce between dad, faculty member, hosting the show, person who mows the grass, like all of that can happen in the course of an hour. It's like this strange thing that's challenging me with like redefining my identity and the effort that I have to put into like consciously deciding what I will let my identity be or what I'll, act out of versus like it being defined by like, well, during these hours when I'm in my office, this is kind of what my identity is. And those things are all separate, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of like, again, more like even how even the groups we've been talking about, like teams interact, set the stage, right? I mean, it has happened to me that it's either an early morning meeting, and because of the time some differences, I will, okay, I'm just gonna stay on my t-shirt and just take it from like a voice call, and suddenly everybody connects their cameras. So then you have to run and get at least some top that is appropriate and enjoy the group, right? So it's even in those little details that either, I mean, you take it in a very disciplined way, like you were saying. I mean, I'm going into my space, family. I'm going to the office, and you really try to preserve your old rituals or routines, or or you take the other one, which is super flexible, of like, oh, today I don't think I'm gonna connect my camera because this and that. So it's I mean, again, it's really impacting, to your point. It's really impacting us in the most intimate way of like how we live our personal life, but also how we mix both work and life in that sense.
Well, the new mullet, I'm telling you, this is my pandemic saying here. The new mullet is business up top, party on the bottom, right? Like, am I wearing my pajama pants? Am I wearing shorts right now? I don't know, right? It's no longer the mullet here. This is the mullet, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were joking about the facial hair, right? I mean, I, I tell my wife, it's like in the previous world, growing the facial hair takes time, and in between you look a little bit not very well composed, right? Here I would look at, if any, this is the time that I'm just gonna go and explore. So
I've seen so many more beards. Normally at this time of year, people are thinking about getting rid of them because of the heat. And I can't believe the number of beards that I know we have going on in the organization and across my friends and things like that. It's absolutely true, but I'm finding I'm starting to have sort of the opposite happen. I started out in the beginning being really casual, and then I got tired of it. I was like, I got to dress up a little more. I have jewelry as my form of artistic expression. I'm not even wearing my jewelry. I got to start wearing some earrings. Those kinds of things have slowly evolved, but I think you're both absolutely right. There's so much blurring of all of the different parts of our lives right now. Um, you know, Before I left the office, I put my computer in my bag. I went home. If I needed to do something, I took it out. I turned it on. Now it's on all the time. So it's just a matter of just scooting over and sitting down, and we're blurring those lines. But we were already going down that path with our phones and our iPads, and the having that 24/7 access, and people having 24/7 access to us.
yeah.
So when you think about, and again, this is something we've sort of danced around too here, but when each of you thinks about the future and, whether it's directly related to the pandemic or not, what are some of your bold predictions of where this is going to take us and what we might see unfolding ahead of us when it comes to being creative and innovative and collaborating with each other?
I mean, for me, I think it's again, it's gonna push us more into finding ways to normalize the new situation, not only the way we work, but also, I mean, especially because in our field of design, it's how do we really going to enable people back to those socialization. If I think about design in the end, that's what we do. I mean, either by architecture, which would be the largest scale representation, but all the way to graphics, which would be the opposite. It's always the intention of how do we make life easier and better for the humankind, right? So in that sense, it's gonna be a lot of. I mean, I think if I put it back into like a design thinking framework, this is where we're gonna be. We'll be iterating. I wouldn't say even like for the next few months. This is gonna be a couple of years of iterating and finding what is the new solutions based on a like changing world. Because I mean, it was already changing very rapidly. Now it's very uncertain. So
I think about like the amount of effort that I have put in over the years to try and help students understand the importance of embracing ambiguity. And it's almost like they've been taught the opposite of that for however many years through a very rote system, and then I'm trying to break them of that. And I find it interesting, like listening to what you're talking about, or even just thinking about how everything has become ambiguous, that's almost going to become like a natural skill that you have to have, or even if you don't know how to name it, it's going to be starting to get built into you, right? Like you are just, we are in the iteration phase right now, whether we want to be or not. Like you're in it. You can't. Used to be we would maybe like forcibly put some constraints on to try and get you in the iteration phase and thinking differently. Well, now we're all
the
in
constraints are naturally there. Yes.
Right. We're here, right? So we're iterating, and that's what you need to put language to and know that like this is how you behave during the iteration phase of any design problem. You're all a part of one now, right?
There's very few things that you can't find some relationship to in history. And, if you think about the darkest times in our history, they always produce enormous light afterwards, right? All of those periods of our history have been followed by tremendous periods of creativity. And although this isn't the Dark Ages, or, it's not the flu of the Spanish flu, close, but we will see that again. And I think we're also, when you kind of take that combined with not just the pandemic, but everything else that's going on in our world right now, that obviously is leaving a lot of opening for new opportunity. There's that, and then there's this huge potential sea change that's going to come with generational shifts. And if you look back at generational research, we are right there at this huge generational shift that is going to create enormous positive change, because the structure of generations tends to repeat itself over time, like every fourth generation, right? So we're due for another sort of greatest generation. And where we are in history and where we are in our society right now, need that. We really need that. It's time, and I think it's coming. I think it's just moving some people out of the way and giving other people some opportunity, and we're going to see huge shifts in our world, and I think all for the better.
Yeah, so the question I pose then is, does design formally play a role in that? Does it informally? We've talked, Hector and I have talked before in the past about how the concept of design thinking started in a really good pure place, and it was beneficial to spread over to other areas, but then in some ways now it's almost become tokenized or turned into a parlor trick. Do you think that this potentially like brings that back into like the purity of design, or does it actually spread it further to where everybody's kind of playing in the design space without calling it that?
Probably some of both, because I think right now, which we talked about, lots of creativity coming out of this pandemic, right? This just you look at just some of the things that little kids are doing on YouTube and stuff like that. I mean, there's just enormous creativity. They're not thinking of it as design thinking, right? They're just having fun. So yes, we've unleashed that, right? And we're clearly heading down a path of a new forms of education, and a lot of I believe connections to education longer over a lifetime, as opposed to what we think of as the traditional education years of pre-K 16. We are going to have much more lifelong learning going on. Those kinds of things, I think, will contribute to raising the bar on design and the importance of design, and whether it's a product or it's a service or it's the delivery of an educational system or something else.
Yeah,
Hector,
no,
what-
I agree exactly. It's like we were talking, right? I mean, it's how like tight you go to the concept of this is a design thinking and it's owned by designers. Yeah, I mean that will continue to drive innovation firms and industries. But there's again in the end the human component of design, as Lauren saying, that it's like we people behave most of the times with the design thinking effort is like all the way from like I need to punch a hole in the wall, and you go through your own very personal design thinking process. You don't know that it's design thinking, but it's in the end, it's just more like somebody branded it and like, hey, well, the way you solve that problem was pretty much design thinking. So I think to the question, I think design as the way of humans to fulfill needs and expand experiences and try to seek a better self in that sense. If I'm going very philosophical, I think will continue to drive now, even with a bigger driver, which is the hopefully not a nostalgia never, but this element of like at some point I want to go back to what I so called my old normal. It will be a constant seeking of going back to what was familiar. That will lead. I mean, it definitely will lead us to a different norm, but with that same driver of like I need to find a solution that gets me back to where I was before.
great. Well, anything that we haven't talked about that either of you would like to, leave us with or interject into the conversation?
What I mean, I've enjoyed Lauren and Aaron. It's been a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a lot of fun. And Hector, it was nice to meet you. Aaron,
Yes,
too.
nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you as well. We should keep this conversation going. I think it would be fun and beneficial, and we can bring other people into it.
Definitely.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I think that, it's actually, this feels like a very tangible example of some of the things that other people have talked about how it's flattening the world. Just the idea of doing a show like this in the past would have sort of had a preconceived expectation of a level of production and polish and everything that, since it's not possible anymore, we've all accepted and recognized, okay, well, without that, how do we still make something cool happen? And actually, it sort of flattened the world a little bit, right? To be able to say, like, well, our range of guests could be from anywhere, any time zone, any subject area. We just want to talk about what we're all having as a shared experience now, right? And let's do it in this format and in this way. So that's another one of those examples that I hope maybe we carry out of this, right? Like reduce the barriers to entry to having interesting conversations like this and then sharing with others so that it sparks other people to have those same conversations.
Yeah. No, great.
Getting-
Yeah, super happy to continue the conversation. It was great. You can't wait to see what happened next in all
Right. Depending on when somebody
territories.
watches this, who knows? If you're watching this in late 2020, you may think, wow, can you believe how off base those people were, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe we were spot on, who knows, right?
I can't wait to see what the return to the university looks like.
Oh yeah, the education is it's a big question mark. Yeah.
I know. I sit on the advisory council for the College of Engineering and was on a town hall the other day. The conversation was about returning in some hybrid form, and a lot of things got brought up about the complexities of that. Can if you have kids on campus and they're living in dorms, can you make sure their schedules are such that they actually have in-person classes and online classes, and not only online classes, so that they never leave their dorm rooms? I mean, it was a really fascinating conversation, and of course, the big question mark there is financially, can you charge the same? Can
Value, yes.
Mhm.
Right. Well, particularly a large university becomes such an interesting thing because you're now talking about a literal ecosystem that's being
Right.
created there, right? So we're not just talking about how do you effectively deliver instruction that adds value or create dorms that are safe. It's an entire symbiotic ecosystem that you have to think about.
And
It's the size of a small town,
culture.
a medium-sized town, right?
And the culture. Mhm.
Yeah,
Right.
great point.
Right. What are the things that attract students to that university, right? And
Exactly.
are those still intact? And
Yeah.
so it's there's going to be all kinds of really interesting things that come out of this. And of course, I think we all realize we're going to lose a number of universities in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like there's restaurants that won't come back, or retailers or models that weren't sustainable won't come back. I mean, this education's not immune to that, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. There were a lot of mid-sized universities that were barely surviving before all this happened. So it's going to be a really fascinating time. And as is most often the case, when there's a void, something will fill it.
Yes.
Great. Well, Lauren, Hector, thank you both. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody who tuned in to watch today. And if you're watching this online and have the opportunity to contribute, please do feel free to comment. Reach out to us on the social media channels and join the conversation. Let us know what your thoughts were on today's conversation, or even suggestions of what you think your bold predictions are about the future, or what kinds of topics we should be talking about on this show. So we really invite that interaction. I want to say a big thank you to Cincinnati Bell for making this possible, for creating this format, and inviting us to have this. It's just a great example of embracing the ambiguity and trying to be in the moment. So we thank you for that. And look forward to seeing you again next time. Please continue to join us as we progress through this and talk with different people as we all work through making a better, creative, collaborative, innovative world together. So thanks again, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next time.